back, Bob Woodson, you were saying it's not enough to exchange white papers. That's good for the intellectuals. But the battles at the ground level. They have the Smithsonian Institution now, 1619 effort in the New York Times. Our public schools, a growing number of them, are embracing this. This is a big problem. And you're saying we compete against this how?
Well, first of all, as I said to conservatives, if we were fighting the Second World War, executing it, and we were invading Normandy, we would have only Navy and the Air Force, and we'll be bombing the hell out of, waiting for Hitler to show up and surrender on the beach. We wouldn't have any Marines or soldiers, nor would we be supporting the insurgents in these occupied countries.
We need ground forces.
We need ground forces. So that's why, with 1776, we assembled not just thinkers, and that's important, but we also activists, people whose lives and actions embody the principles that we said we advocate. If we want people to embrace these principles and virtues, we must demonstrate that they have the consequence of improving people's lives. They can restore communities. So we brought people like John Ponder from Los Angeles, Tyrone Parker from Washington, and Gary Wyatt from Akron, Ohio, Willie Peterson. All of these are activists in low-income communities, bringing about a gang intervention and making communities safe. John Ponder is taking 2,000 people who've come out of prison and helped them to live stable lives. He has 500 volunteers. 50 of them, about 40%, are police officers. Police officers actually mentoring ex-offenders, and as a consequence, the violent encounters between police and the minority community is dramatically reduced. So what we have models on the ground around the country that shows that these are people who are taking those values and using them as a means of promoting redemption and transformation of people and communities, and they're restoring communities. We as conservatives must see them as allies and supply them with funding. Also, scholars should be writing about them. And so when you're talking about a principle, it would be good to point to an example in a low-income communities. What the Woodson Center is trying to establish is a center for the study of resilience and not just do failure studies. And so, as you say, the left uses Broadway, movies. So what we're doing at 1776, we're going to have K through 12 curriculum, we're going to have videos, we're going to have festivals to celebrate 1776. We also should make grassroots leaders civic teachers. So if young people cleave to these grassroots leaders, we at the Woodson Center want to equip these grassroots leaders so that they are teaching young people the values and virtues of our founders, and not just leave it to the academic scholars to do that. And so it's a comprehensive approach. We should see movies. We want to see more movies. We have an illustrator as a part of us. So we just want to have children's books. Mark, the leading book in the socialist section in Amazon is Communism for Kids. That's what we're up against. But we've got to match it. That's why what the Woodson Center is doing is we are developing a ground game. But we need support for that.
You also seem to be saying conversely, we have to do this because we're up against this radical ideology that says more government, society's bad. There's nothing you can do for yourself to break out of this.
Right.
It's in America's DNA. This is a failed country from day one. And what you seem to be saying to me and the nation is, we better rid ourselves of that mighty fast. And it's particularly deleterious to minority communities where the suffering, honestly, is greater for a whole host of reasons. And what the New York Times and the 1619 Project is basically dressing up hardcore leftism and pushing it out as part of American history. Am I right?
Right, and they're trying to divide us. They're saying that what's important. But Mark, that mother in Palo Alto who lost a 17-year-old daughter to suicide, and that a mother, a black mother in public housing in Washington lost a 17-year-old daughter to homicide. They have more in common they do in their difference. One isn't white privilege and the other one is lack of social justice. No, we must put race aside so we can find out why, even in affluent white communities like in Palo Alto, the suicide rate is 6 times the national average. In inner city Washington, D.C., the Center for Disease Control said that 10% of the middle schoolers have attempted suicide. Well, there are 4,000 middle schoolers. That means that's more than one a day. So there's a crisis, a moral and spiritual crisis. But as long as we have to contend with racial differences, we won't be able to get at that deep longing that's inside. One other thing, deep in the DNA of this country is a desire to support virtue. And it gets expressed in spontaneous ways. When a homeless man up in Boston found a knapsack with $46,000 in it, and he turned it in, someone posted up on GoFundMe, they raised $93,000 in a matter of days. When a black homeless guy up in Oakland, a white woman came and emptied her change purse and it had her $15,000 wedding band in it. She came back 5 hours later, and he held it up and said, "You're looking for this." Again, there was an outpouring of support. So that means that deep in the DNA, there is a thirst to support virtue. But they want to see a sermon. They're tired of people preaching sermons. They're tired of this gladiatorial combat. That's why 1776, we aren't offering this as a debate. We want to offer the country a more inspirational and aspirational alternative by telling stories. For instance, Mark, everybody ought to read about Covert, Michigan.
When we come back, I want you to tell us about Covert, Michigan. We'll be right back.